Then, ready, set, go. Okay, so hello everybody.
Hello, welcome to our second lecture for this semester, and we are very happy to have Simon Denny here today.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hello. Okay. One thing we mentioned earlier. Thanks. Just go back here. We are having this workshop mid-speed. Our first guest is giving one, so you can just read the text and send us an email to sparta.kunstakademiedüsseldorf@gmail.com if you're interested by Sunday, and then we'll figure out the dates and so on. And now we can directly go into your talk.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, hi everybody. Whoever's listening, and thanks again to you guys for hosting me. It's an honor to be a part of this event. I'm just going to talk through some projects that I've made over the past couple of years. Actually, two projects specifically. And you can see on this kind of pretty interestingly, beautifully rendered trompe-l'oeil stage, like some slides in the background. So the first project I want to talk about, maybe I should start by saying kind of who I am. So I'm an artist who lives in Berlin, but I grew up in New Zealand. And I went to art school in New Zealand. I graduated in 2005 from the University of Auckland, which is where I went to school. I then moved to Germany a couple of years later to go to art school in Frankfurt at the Städelschule, and had a great time and met a bunch of people, and then moved to Berlin a couple of years after that in 2009. So I've been working in and out of Berlin from pretty much since 2009. And I also recently started to teach in Germany. So I'm now teaching in my third semester at the Bödeker in Hamburg. So I'm very familiar with the art school context here. And it's great that you guys are doing this kind of online stuff while it's unsafe to meet. But anyway, so there's an image here, and this image is of a very special museum, which I just recently made an exhibition at in Australia, in Tasmania, which is the smallest state in Australia. If you guys know it, it's like an island at the bottom of Australia, and it's had a very complicated history with waves of colonization. And genocide, kind of, which is, kind of a subplot to the exhibition I made there in a certain sense, because it's a show that tried to address resource extraction and labor hierarchies from a lens of a contemporary world. So where data is also a big part of the extractive paradigm. But anyway, back to what we're looking at. This is the Museum of Old and New Art. It's a pretty crazy, amazing place. I can't point to things in this format, but there's a little white chimney to the right hand of the screen, which is the original building, a modernist building built in the 1950s. The rest is completely excavated out of this cliff face, a very ambitious building. The museum has a huge collection of very spectacular art. So it's like very much experience-based art viewing. So you can see actually in this front face, like a couple of different works that they have, which are sort of stars of the collection, which are these these James Turrell pieces on the other side to the white chimney. So this A frame with a kind of a globe in it is actually a James Turrell work and a restaurant at the same time. And the one above it with this kind of like roof, this glowing roof, is another James Turrell. So there's a lot of very experience-based artworks in here, and it's kind of a tourist destination as much as it is an art-oriented destination in Australia. But it's one of the largest collections of private collections of art in the Southern Hemisphere. And it is run by this guy, David Walsh, who is actually made all of his money gambling. So he runs a worldwide gambling business, as far as I understand it, which essentially uses software and data prediction to predict, like to make better betting odds than like normal betting agencies make. And he started the collection when he needed to get some money out of, I think it was South Africa, and he bought some art and exited with more valuable art than he could take cash away in. And that's how he got interested in collecting. It then grew into a big enterprise, and this purpose-built museum, which opened in the mid-zeros. And this is a view to the kind of entranceway. When you go into the museum, you actually go down this kind of crazy staircase. And there's this exposed cliff face, which is like the main hall of the building, and also the way you enter exhibitions. So you're always kind of in this crazy underground zone. Here's another view. So yeah, there's this kind of mix of postmodern architecture, I guess, and like kind of raw rock, which makes this very special art experience. And I wanted to address the context as much as I wanted to address my interests in the show. Often when I make exhibitions, I am working with, as much context as I can. So I feel like, you know, an art exhibition, especially now we're stuck indoors and looking at everything on a screen, an art exhibition, one of the special things about it is that it's a time and a place, and in a country, in a city, in a building, in a situation. And I always try and build that into presentations as much as I can. In this case, I was given the opportunity to do a commission for this museum, and which is just closed, actually. It closed for COVID, but it was going to be on until mid-April. But it was on for almost a year, called Mine. And this is the main kind of masthead image we used. I worked with a number of illustrators on it. But this illustrator also does work for like online video games. So like big releases, you know, massive EA Sports releases type things. And, you know, what did he do one for, like Red Dead Redemption? I think he worked on that. So yeah, I worked with a particular kind of image making for the advertising around it, referring to gaming. And I was also reading a bunch of books at the time of thinking about how to bring this extractive paradigm together. So both, as I say, resource-based extraction, pulling stuff out of the ground, and like data extraction. And I read this book, which probably a lot of people have heard of as it came out, by Shoshana Zuboff, called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. And this is just a quote which frames some of my interests. So surveillance capitalism is a new economic order that claims human experience as free raw material for hidden commercial practices of extraction, prediction, and sales. Instead of mining the natural landscape, surveillance capitalists extract their raw material from human experience. So that was inspiring to me. And then I also was reading this other amazing text written by Kate Crawford and Vlad Njola. Kate Crawford is an Australian kind of researcher, sometime band person, also a musician, but she runs an AI ethics research unit associated with NYU called AI Now, which is a fantastic place to learn about the ethics of AI. And they have all sorts of great people there. But this quote was also important to me. She said, it's necessary to move beyond a simple analysis of the relationship between an individual human, their data, and any single technology company in order to contend with the truly planetary scale of extraction. There are deep interconnections between the literal hollowing out of the materials of the earth and biosphere and the data capture and monetization of human practices of communication and sociality. Thinking about extraction requires thinking about labor, resources, and data together. This presents a challenge to critical and popular understandings of artificial intelligence. It's hard to see any of these processes individually, let alone collectively. Hence the need for a visualization that can bring these connected but globally dispersed processes into a single map. And that was describing a project they were working on, but I also kind of took it as a call to challenge for an artist like myself who likes to work with the politics of technology and try and make that into a kind of experiential space. So where you can kind of viscerally feel these problems rather than just read about them. So more about the museum. Mona's a very special museum in a number of ways. It's not only in a hole in the ground, but it also runs on a really kind of advanced platform. So every visitor into the museum gets an iPhone-like device, which holds, which has everything in it. So it's all your audio guides, there's virtual lines for experience-based rides that you can sign up to. There's maps, and there's any wall text or anything like that is also on there. So the art is presented in the space, and then every other piece of information you need to interact with the museum is on this device. And it's run by a company called Art Processors, which David also owns. That makes it a pretty special museum experience. The other thing that happens in this context is that while you're walking around looking at the artworks with this device, every time you kind of walk in front of it, it captures your motion, so it knows where you are in the museum and if you're in front of a certain artwork, so it will give you the relevant information. But of course, it also takes quite a lot of data about clients and about visitors in the space. So if you're walking around the museum, this machine kind of tracks you and knows how long you spent in front of a particular artwork. And that means that you can get some pretty interesting data about the way people use the museum. You can also like and dislike artworks on the platform. So there's this kind of running tally of the way people interact with work in there, which is pretty new. So it's a kind of data caption device as well in a kind of hole in the ground. I did this show called Mine, and I was able to use this device as well and kind of design an experience for it. And this was an early kind of look at the interface. And this is the space which I use, like a kind of a top down. So it was a kind of 4-room experience, very much designed for the typical visitor of this space. So just to give you a sense of how these rooms operated. So you would come from this giant cliff face into this area, and there's this big kind of graphic on the wall, but also this giant diagram called The Anatomy of an AI System, which was done by Kate Crawford and Vlad Jola. So this other text that I just read. They also did this amazing map, which essentially tried to capture everything that the world needs to run one AI system. And that system is the Amazon smart speaker, the Echo. So this is supposedly everything from kind of science to minerals to kind of a huge internet stack, and different labor forces, seen and unseen, named and unnamed, and then a kind of whole recycling system and waste. So everything that goes into kind of running this, what is kind of seemingly a very ephemeral process, is in this diagram. It's a really amazing thing. It's also online, so there's the URL up there. I encourage you guys to look at it. It's also got an amazing text along with it. But I took it as a starting point to kind of ground us in the show. And then this is, as you enter the Mine exhibition, you are then prompted to scan the first augmented reality experience. And there's an augmented reality layer on top of all pieces in the show, essentially. So I can kind of show you now. Till, if you want to play the first video.
Sure. It's working.
Cool. So you
can
essentially
see.
scan this scanner on the right. I don't know if you're seeing that.
Yes. And all the speakers appearing.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So this Amazon pops. I can't see this, but the Amazon pops out of the wall, and so you kind of essentially see the way that kind of goes. Yeah. So that's how the thing works. So that's sort of teaching you how to use an AR layer. But the great thing about working with this show was that essentially, everybody already had a device. I don't know if anybody in this room has tried to make augmented reality works, but one of the problems is you have to have devices. But the cool thing about working with an augmented reality device in the context of this exhibition is that everybody's already carrying around a device that can do AR. So it's not this whole kind of problem. Anyway, so the next room you then kind of walk into is this giant kind of almost empty room with a couple of things on the wall and this cage in a very dark, dramatic space. And this cage is actually a kind of a translation of a drawing. So as a part of Kate Crawford's research and Vlad Jordan's research, they went through many patents that Amazon was working with in the eco context. And they stumbled upon this drawing and this device, which is a kind of a cage for Amazon workers in their worker space to work inside. So it's supposed to be a way to kind of keep a human worker safe inside a largely robotic work environment. But obviously it has this kind of crazy symbolism of like a cage for a human worker. And you literally, the cage kind of plops on top of these little units that usually move around these giant shelving systems in the Amazon warehouses. So, but instead of a shelving system with product on it, you have like a worker on it with this kind of bizarre mechanical arm. So I was really struck by the poetry of this thing, and I wanted to make one in the flesh to kind of try and pop it out of the page as a kind of a monumental life-size sculpture to kind of automation. So I went down to my local metal workshop and told them to kind of work on this drawing, translating it in there. And this is kind of, you see it, and this is the result. So we just kind of made this drawing reel. And I kind of, as a sculptural device, like left on some of these numbers that kind of label different parts of the patented object. To kind of give it this kind of unreal diagrammatic kind of remnant at the same time as it was a kind of real life object. Here's some other kind of angles that show you how that sculpture looked. As a parallel narrative to the Amazon cage, I wanted to kind of activate it in a different way to sort of think about different workers and ways workers occupy hierarchies and the types of sacrifices that are made by workers often in the systems that we are all a part of. And I was looking at various different ways of thinking about a worker and a body, and I was in conversation with a few scientists who were working on conservation efforts at the same time. And like many things in the world, because of the climate emergency, we are looking at the extinction of many, many species. And this bird, the King Island brown thornbill, was a Tasmanian bird that was likely to become extinct in the next 20 years, and the most likely birds to become extinct. And I thought this would be a super interesting thing to kind of put into dialogue with this cage. I guess I was kind of thinking about, a giant hole in the ground, a place of extraction like the museum is, but also kind of like maybe like a canary in the coal mine type metaphor in making this thing. So as you know, canaries give their lives essentially to warn coal miners of toxicity levels. So the canary will die before a human will die. And I was kind of thinking that these kind of species that were becoming extinct were sort of operating a little bit like this with the entire kind of industrial system. So anyway, we got into touch with these guys who are tracking these very, very rare birds. and at the Australian National University, and we kind of gave them a few resources from the exhibition budget to kind of make some images and hopefully capture some video of these birds so that we could render a bird for the augmented reality effect. And they couldn't get any video, but they did manage to catch on that trip some sound. So for the first time, this very rare bird's call was captured. And I think we have, I don't know if you can hear that, but that's the call of the bird. And we essentially made this render of the bird and put it inside the cage. So if you guys can tell if you can play this next video, it gives you a sense of the augmented reality experience.
Yeah, ready to go.
Cool.
Sweet.
I, again, can't really see what's happening because my live stream is lagged, but...
yeah, you see the text right now? And the bird?
Cool.
Then the text
so
about...
that's like a little bit of information, exactly, about each thing.
And now it's scanned.
Right, cool. So you see this kind of bird comes out and is sort of flying around inside the cage. There's also like a text layer on top of that where live tweets are also present in the cage. So it's I just think I hashtagged climate extinction, and there's a lot of tweets about climate extinction at the moment in Australia. So you get this kind of sense of it. And what the kind of crazy thing is, I think we'll go through a few different videos of how this experience is, but also when you get to a large group, it's quite amazing because, you know, there's kind of many different individual bird calls coming out of these devices. And even if you're kind of not looking at the augmented reality experience, you get this kind of sense of this huge absence of this bird because it's this kind of artificially generated experience. So you get this kind of loud kind of group of birds kind of going, and most of the time in the museums, because it's very busy, this museum, lots of people are looking at this at once, and actually there's potentially more bird calls happening in this little room than there are in the rest of the kind of wild, let's say, or the kind of non-human world where they live. So yeah, it's quite a poignant, sad, but really incredible way of thinking about labor and the way that labor functions in a context like this. So yeah, maybe back to my slides. Yeah, this is another view from the rest of the room. And down the end of the room, you kind of had the patent document that the cage was taken from, like all laid out, but then overlaid with this render of this bird. So you get this kind of story of the bird and the pattern of the cage kind of all in one. Yeah, here's a few details from that, so you can kind of see how that looked. And then you went from this very austere room into a very different room environment. This kind of crazy, overloaded, giant board game room with these huge cardboard displays all over them that sort of approximated a trade fair experience. So the floor was covered in an image of this game, which is a very popular Australian board game called Squatter, which was kind of tried to gamify the economics of running a sheep farm, which is a very important colonial and post-colonial kind of industry. So when people from various parts of Europe came to Australia and had this very damaging interaction with the people who were already living and using that country, they kind of reused the land for these for rearing sheep, and they sent meat all over the world. Same happened in New Zealand where I grew up. So it's New Zealand and Australia are kind of known as kind of farming nations after this kind of colonial moment. And this is a game that sort of tried to describe that, and it has these kind of different spaces, industrial spaces of ways of using land. And I thought that was another industrial paradigm to kind of lay underneath the experience of thinking about extraction and different types of beings. So I even made my own version, which was a big part of the exhibition, and also coincided as the kind of catalog for the show. So I adapted all the graphics and the kind of mechanics of the game, but instead I used imagery from land mining, like from resource extraction out of the ground, and I used like the narrative of a data company. So like different platforms, like a Facebook type platform and a Google type platform, you all kind of battle for domination of the space. Yeah, that's what the box looks like. That's what the back of the box looks like. Yeah, Extractor is a dystopian board game that maps the possible dynamics of global data-driven business or platforms that they complete for world domination, etc. And instead of kind of collecting sheep characters, you collect these data stacks, and you play as a kind of anthropomorphic robot, which looks like this in different colors, which is actually based on this Namjoon Pike that the museum owns, and is also a part of the experience of going to the museum. So yeah, lots of referential layers to the space there. Yeah, this is the data stack. So you kind of collect your data pieces and you stack them up on this kind of bird-like shape, which is obviously like a Twitter logo. So yeah, that's the way you accumulate resources and exploit the space. There's also a rule book, which doubles as a kind of an essay book. So there's the rules for Extractor, but then there's a copy of the Anatomy of an AI System text, and other texts like a specially commissioned piece by Tony Birch, who's an Indigenous poet and author there in Australia as well. And there's also kind of like a, let's say like an index of mining machines. So automated robotic machines that are kind of being produced to mine and extract stuff from the earth, which is an accelerating part of Australia's economy now as well. So mining has always been one of the ways which, as I say, kind of colonial and post-colonial Australia has got its wealth. But now the world of the mine is accessed often without humans and increasingly without humans. So that you have these kind of automated bodies, these kind of robots that kind of pull resources from the earth. And I did a kind of a little index of some of those machines that are working in Australia, like this semi-autonomous rock-bearing boomer, which is like basically a giant drill. And then I made these sculptures out of them. So I got this guy who was this kind of illustrator who works on these video games, like I said, the guy who did the kind of original box drawing, to illustrate these kind of giant versions, one-to-one scale of these machines. And I mounted them on these, so here's a LiDAR, like something that makes a vehicle automated. It's kind of a seeing device. This is an automated platform for hiring. And I mounted them on kind of display units for these board games, Extractor. So here's an autonomous train that Rio Tinto, one of the biggest mining companies in Australia, runs as this kind of giant point of sale for this Extractor board game. So yeah, they're all kind of built from these units of cardboard and made into this quite spectacular experience. This is a smartwatch that tracks the few kind of humans that are left underground in terms of their fatigue. So management can kind of track you 24/7 and see how tired you are, and then kind of take you out of action when it looks like you're not able to handle it anymore. Pretty dystopian tracking machine, probably, yeah, in anticipation of what will come post-COVID. Anyway, yeah, here's another angle of that. They also had these kind of screen units beside them, which you could then scan. And so if you go back to the video experience, you can hopefully see one of the developers interacting with the video.
Okay. Wait for a second. I forgot about the second bird, but
you
now
see, kind of scan that screen area.
Now it's working. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So I think that kind of runs on to another video, which kind of shows you another way of interacting. Oh, with the screen.
Introducing the world's first predictive fatigue monitoring.
I don't know exactly where you guys are, but you essentially got a layered advertisement for this object on top of the screen.
Okay, should I start the second video?
I guess so. Yeah, I don't kind of know exactly which video you're at.
It's the extractor.
Oh, okay.
And there's another thing, bird scans.
Long wall mining.
Right, exactly. So you kind of scan these other, yeah. Where can I see? A little bit lost with the link.
I think you can just continue.
Yeah. So essentially, one walked around the space, interacting with these things, and one also scanned one's own face. And kind of like animated rocks of of one's face kind of came up and diagnosed like your mood, and also kind of told you which rare earth elements were used in making. This is a image of one of these extractor machines. And then another video of it, yeah. But this is...
You can show the video.
Okay, cool.
Long wall mining today has turned into data mining as well.
Wall mining today
In a
has
fully
turned
equipped
into...
cat long wall system, there are up to 3,000 sensors.
Okay, I can't
So
hear
that's
you
a-
because the sound is so long.
Cat
Just wait a
automated long
second.
wall requires less miners interface during operation.
We need technology that makes decisions so that we
Technology
reach the
that makes
level
the
of full.
decision so that we reach the level
Take
of
command.
autonomy.
It's your mind.
Yeah, so that's a real advertisement, which me, when I first saw it, seemed absolutely crazy. But that's the type of like internal advertising that is done within the industry about these kind of extraction machines. So it's all about the more you can pull up, the more you can automate, and these kind of very scary looking kind of crazy images of mining and extraction. And they use these kind of dumb puns like it's your mine and stuff like that, which is clearly not their mine. It's their mine, not our mine, you know. And then there's another video, I think, that you can potentially skip through, another one of those, but this is Joy Global extracting kind of coal-face shearer, which is another example of this type of advertising, but maybe we should move on to this image of a bird and the way of kind of, scanning one's own experience through the space. So if you can then play maybe the video from the moment that this woman scans her own face. This is one of the developers that worked on the app.
Okay, I'm sure I will find it. Ah, yeah, here we go.
So you kind of scan your own face, and then it kind of it diagnoses you with a kind of mood, and then it overlays these parts onto your face, which kind of map your face in rare earth elements, and they're the same rare earth element that are used and extracted in Australia, but used in making iDevices and screens. So it's this kind of tautological material experience of like of having of what's in your hand. So I don't know if you've seen a few of these kind of moments of overlay, but you can probably come back now to my slide deck, and you can see like this is an overlay of copper, one of the important rare earth elements that is extracted from the ground to make screens, on top of a user's face. And there's another one. There's me scanning myself, my angry face. It's weird that this particular default software is often detecting people as angry. So then you then moved into a kind of a shop where you could kind of buy a copy of this extractor board game. And here is somebody pulling a board game out of the sculpture and going and kind of buying it. This is actually an image of the curator selling it to the owner, David, of the museum. So a very many layers of reference in this experience. And then there was a third room of figurative sculptures, which I asked the curators of the museum themselves to curate a show of figurative sculptures of artists from Australia and beyond, of how artists had kind of imaged the figure at work in relation to various kinds of interpretations of technology. And there were artists that were, indigenous artists who kind of had different ideas of what technology should even be thought of as, all the way through to kind of Australian icons like Patricia Pizzanini and an artist who you see at the front here, which was somebody that I grew up with as one of my heroes, an artist from New Zealand called Michael Patakofai, who is an Indigenous Māori New Zealand artist, and this is an image of a worker, a kind of a guard. So many different figures standing upon this platform. And then maybe you can play this part of the video, Till, which shows you again the kind of interaction with these scanned elements underneath that platform.
Yeah, it comes directly after the... now we have it. Kapahaka.
Yeah, exactly. So these little triangles underneath this platform show you, are also to be scanned and then kind of show you the data that's being collected on the device that you're using to watch, to watch the show. So it shows you the fact that you are being tracked with this device at the same time as you're using it. There's this kind of reveal that all the while you're kind of experiencing this show about data that actually data is being collected. So that is what that was like. And maybe come back to my screen. So this is still of visitor engagement, and kind of shows you the average visitor time spent in the show, which is like 30 minutes, which is like a hugely long time to spend in an art show, actually. So engagement was really high in that space. This is an image of the Patricia Pizzanini classic of these two elderly boys playing Game Boy. And then it goes to this kind of like last piece, which is as you walk out of that exhibition space, which was the pike. One of the things I did was I made a 3D scan of that pike and cast it in the soil that was used to make the exhibition space out of the ground. So whenever they make a new part of that museum, which is always expanding, they dig up a whole bunch of dirt, and I cast that into this kind of soil version of these robots, which is at once art, but also kind of mineral-based screens or something like that. So that was that project. I will then just kind of run on and talk about this second project that I want to speak to, which is a more recent project that I just did in January of this year. And I showed it in San Francisco. So another place very connected to an extractive kind of environment, and the type of capitalism that Susanna Zuboff speaks about in surveillance capitalism. So these are older images from the 1970s of New Zealand, where I grew up. But it's with Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister of Great Britain. Before she was Prime Minister in the 1970s, she made a visit as an education minister, I think, to New Zealand. And this is her with some Indigenous people, some like a Māori performing unit, and then also with Sir Robert Muldoon, who was our Prime Minister at that stage. And the kind of exhibition I made was sort of dealing with the legacy of Thatcher in a certain sense and trying to connect that with the contemporary. So yeah, probably everybody knows this, but Thatcher was famous for a number of things, but she took Britain through a kind of financialist turn, let's say, in policy. where private enterprise was introduced into government a lot more. And she also famously insisted on a particular kind of understanding of like what made up society. So her two kind of famous phrases are, there's no such thing as society, there are individual men and women, and there are families. So she kind of rejected this notion that that the world was made up, that Britain was made up of a kind of community, more that it was more individually focused. And she also said there is no alternative. And what she meant was there's no alternative to market capitalism. You know, canonical Thatcher moments. Yeah, so I always kind of, one of the things in my practice that I look for is a kind of material trace of conservative politics. So I follow kind of relics and auctions of kind of famous people's stuff. And there recently came up at Christie's an auction that auctioned off a number of things that Margaret Thatcher owned. And I was kind of mesmerized by this list. Many personal items, books, furniture, amazing traces of her kind of aesthetic, which is, in my mind, kind of the aesthetic of, what has become global neoliberalism, essentially. This is an interesting document from that, which is a letter from Rover, the car company, saying how much they enjoyed hosting her to try driving a new Rover, and then they gave her a Burberry scarf, or a series of Burberry scarves in a kind of thanks in 1986. And actually, this Burberry scarf was one of the things that was in this incredible list of things for sale at this auction. And so I like to fantasize that this came from her visit to Rover. But essentially, I bought a couple of lots of Mrs. Thatcher's scarves. There were other people who also bought a number of things from that auction, including this lady who is kind of not really in the newsroom much anymore, but Theresa May. So she famously bought like a bracelet and then was kind of sprung wearing it. Very strange way of inheritance there. But in among the scarves were these very symbolic items. So this is another image of one of the scarves, like the Burberry one. I bought 17 in total. And this is like, literally like a Forbes kind of scarf, which has like, I don't know if you can see it in the image, but it says "No guts, no story," and like Forbes capitalist tool. It's kind of amazing to think that somebody such as Thatcher with her politics was wearing such a scarf. Here's another one, Liberty of London, a very famous upmarket store, like department store, a little bit like Cardiff in London, but has its own kind of brand. And Liberty, of course, has these kind of political overtones of liberalism, and this kind of very interesting kind of nature pattern. Another one, this kind of crazy scarf, which is a Chanel scarf. And I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but one of the crazy things about this Chanel scarf is it actually had kind of makeup stains still on there from Mrs. Thatcher. So very creepy and very kind of embedded with her spirit or something like that, or her trace. Another really interesting one was obviously some kind of diplomatic gift, a red scarf from the Zachary and Elizabeth Fisher House with caring and compassion on it, which is a kind of return services care unit. So US military aid associations. This is another one from the Prime Minister of Thailand. So another kind of a show of globalism, let's say. I also liked the way that this sort of reflected the emergent neoliberalism that Thatcher, kind of is an icon for, and also kind of responsible for spreading in the world. Another one, highly inappropriate, problematic scarf, which speaks to the history of colonialism and expansion. So I was looking at that stuff and I was kind of totally amazed by it. And then at the same time, I was sort of looking at other things and trying to bring them together. This is maybe sometimes shows a little bit of the way that I work. So this is a number of other patents. After this kind of patent moment with this Amazon worker cage, I was also thinking, and I started to kind of look through tons of other patents. And I started to look through Salesforce patents because Salesforce is one of the most prominent employers, I think actually the most prominent employer in San Francisco. And I was thinking about making an exhibition in San Francisco, so I thought, okay, well, what's Salesforce up to? And these are basically all, I mean, Salesforce puts in, like many other companies, like tons and tons of patents a year, like hundreds. But I noticed ones which were kind of ways of understanding, like tracking people and kind of making some sort of vision of community or targeting the individual. So here we have systems and methods of presenting personalized personas online and social networks, dynamic generation of targeted messages using machine learning, systems and methods for customizing content feeds, and community switching. So I thought these were all kind of ways of modeling, producing a kind of image of an individual or a group. Yeah, and then I was sort of looking at other things. I mean, I've been tracking in my research for a long, long time the kind of culture around the venture capital and business culture that is really prominent in Silicon Valley. And this is Drew Houston, one of the founders of Dropbox and CEO, in this kind of Patagonia vest. And the Patagonia vest is something that is really a kind of a uniform in this context. Yeah, here is Jeff Bezos, probably the most famous CEO at the moment, maybe apart from Musk, wearing, again, this kind of puff vest. So this is a sort of a very common thing for these often guys. It's a very gendered space to wear. It even went so far as to being, lampooned as made a parody of in Silicon Valley, the TV show where one of the characters always wore a Patagonia vest. And it has a kind of context of crossover with finance. Another name for this, what's sometimes referred to as the power vest, is the Midtown uniform. And there's literally like a Midtown uniform vest culture Instagram feed, which is quite popular. But interestingly enough, Patagonia obviously is a company that signals in a bit of a different direction than kind of power bros and finance. They think of themselves as a very sustainable company that thinks a lot about, some sort of version of ethical capitalism. And so midway through 2019, like just about a year ago, Patagonia shifted its policy for making these kind of branded collaborations with finance and tech, and said that they couldn't do them anymore. So suddenly Sun Valley and all these other people that kind of used to do Patagonia collaborations had to switch brands. And here's another from the San Francisco Chronicle: Patagonia strips tech workers of the uniform, the logo vest. And it's interesting because Patagonia has quite an interesting dialogue around this. They said they've got kind of nothing against the clients, but they're in the business to save their planet, and they want to double down on their environmental activism and regenerative farming, and simply going with technology and finance people is not on brand enough, apparently. But I managed to pick up at another different type of auction just on eBay, a Patagonia Salesforce collaboration vest. So Salesforce also used to produce these Patagonia vests for their staff. This one's a Quip one that I managed to pick up. Quip is a software company that they hired at one point. They kind of acquired it. And I thought what would be so interesting is to kind of try and make these icons of this space of San Francisco and of this type of advanced neoliberal extractive culture into these vests. So I talked to a tailor friend in Berlin, and we kind of made these versions of the Patagonia collaboration with Salesforce vests out of the real scarves of Thatcher. So the scarves were cut up, sewn into these things, so it's not a copy it's the actual relic of the scarf, kind of mauled, kind of violently pushed into this shape. And I did a few different styles of it and kind of put it inside these frames, which kind of look a little bit like a memorabilia frame, that you kind of get when you get like a sports jacket or something like that. Or, but also I did this kind of layout where all of the different scarf patterns that we used to make these were then also in this kind of like as if you were on a checkout and you were kind of picking your Thatcher scarf pattern online. So some of them are really kind of beautiful. This is this one of this kind of this bird kind of standing there underneath the Salesforce embroidered logo. And I not only kind of made these from the Thatcher scarves and this kind of Salesforce and Patagonia crossover, but I also used a very special type of feather in stuffing these objects, which is made from recycled down so like feathers from San Francisco. So we bought like secondhand, duvets, sleeping bags, jackets, and kind of put them all into this. So it's this real hybrid of materials. And I mean, speaking of Salesforce, Mark Benioff is the CEO, and he's one of the most prominently, let's say, liberal billionaires, if you want to talk about that. And there's this amazing Alex Davis Wired article, which came out in 2018, which kind of talks about Benioff's engagement in the homelessness epidemic. It was also a huge part of what San Francisco is as a city. So there's this huge amount of inequality, very, very visible in San Francisco, where you have some of the wealthiest companies and people in the world, but you also have like a lot of people living outside. And Benioff and Salesforce in general kind of is involved in supposedly trying to kind of push back on that and proposing all sorts of laws that help donations. Philanthropy answers to this problem. And of course, Patagonia not only make these kind of vests of these tech bros, but they also make quite luxurious other outdoorsy equipment, including these sleeping bags. So I was thinking that there was this very interesting crossover in this form between the kind of charged politics that happen around inequality in San Francisco and these Patagonia objects. So I chose this very sarcophagus C-shaped Patagonia sleeping bag, and also made these kind of versions out of Thatcher scarves as well. So a couple of my, a few of the Thatcher scarves went into making these very elaborate versions of these Patagonia sleeping bags. And they also, if you can see in this kind of like kind of singular shot, they also stand up. So they're also kind of erect. So where I mounted behind glass these vests with the Patagonia sleeping bags, I made it into something where you really had to kind of stand in front of it, and it was proudly standing up, which made it look even more like a sarcophagus, obviously, than just a kind of flattened sleeping bag. But here you can kind of see different like moments of those scarves being made into that sleeping bag, and a kind of a look into the eye of the sleeping bag. Here's the other one. I only made 2 of these. You can kind of see they have these very slim profiles, but they really look like some sort of sarcophagi. And then I put those alongside these. I think if you remember earlier in the slideshow, there were these patterns, and I wanted to kind of process and work with these patterns as another way of looking to the kind of the individual as a software format through working with these patterns. So I printed out these patterns, and then I worked with this crazy machine, which is a 3D printer that takes stacks of paper, if you will. And this is like a few examples of kind of what it does, but like you kind of put stacks of paper into the machine, and then it kind of like makes these giant stacks, which you then kind of pull apart by hand. It's a very convoluted machine process to then get this kind of final positive. So you have this giant block of a stack of paper that you then take away to reveal this 3D printed form, which is made from layers of cut and glue pieces of paper. So I put, instead of blank paper into this, is what you would usually feed it with, I put the patents of the Salesforce products into there. This shows you a little bit of how that machine works. It's now doesn't exist. This totally flopped as a commercial project. But yeah, this shows you a little bit about how it works. So layer by layer, it kind of gets cut and glued, and it takes like about a day to make one of these things, just with the piece of paper. So Till, I think there's a last video, which is this video that shows you a little bit of the inside of this machine.
Okay, I will find it. Ah, yeah, it's on.
Cool. So, I mean, just to give you a sense.
It's super loud though, I can't hear you. I will tell you when it's over.
Okay.
Okay, quite nice.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a boring video, but it's also kind of an interesting process. It's like very convoluted machine, which puts these like dots of glue and kind of cuts each single page. So it's like a totally nonsensical thing. But I started. This image here is like gives you a sense of like what the interface looks like. So you put like a file. In this case, I actually put the cage in, but you kind of put a file in, and then it kind of comes out as this kind of solid block, and then you kind of take it apart. But yeah, so this is the patterns that I then put through. So it shows you these kind of crazy network diagrams, and I then this is how it looks when it comes out of this 3D printer, and then I kind of gradually weed it back into these objects. So you get these stacks of paper, but then reveal kind of layers and layers of forms of the pattern. So I, in this case, put a Salesforce cloud logo in as a kind of form that I wanted it to 3D print, and then you get these kind of layers and layers of this different patterns, and it's kind of quite a beautiful, delicate surface. You really get this like very interesting overlays of different parts of the diagrams that come through on these very, very intricate drawings and texts. Yeah, you can kind of see the texture of each page kind of come onto that. So this show is also, I guess, like every show, I really think of myself as a sculptor, and I'm very, very careful with materials. And I think this gives you a sense of like the delicacy of just working with these kind of giant paper collages in a way. So you get these kind of overlays of different, personas and networks and kind of ways of controlling people through software. Here's another one with a different cloud format kind of coming out of it. These kind of generic kind of jack that they kind of have also appearing through on one of the pages of the Salesforce diagram. Here's another cloud form kind of coming out. So you really get a sense of these kind of different layers of persona control on these objects. And then there was one final piece that went into this show, which was another very sculptural format that I used. This is actually like a British army blanket, which you can buy at any kind of surplus store. They're very, very common. And I then took the Thatcher scarf images and I printed them on top of a tablecloth, like a very, very thin tablecloth, produced in the same region of China where Jack Ma founded Alibaba, actually. So it's an image of a kind of a Thatcher pattern printed on top of a very, very thin plastic, cheap thing made in this region of China, which is very known for industrial success. And I guess, again, kind of for me, like sort of speaks to the imperialism implicit in globalism and the kind of stacks that kind of, resonate from Britain and the Anglo world out. But in order to hang this piece, this is an image of my assistant Julia. You rub it on the wall. You kind of hold it on the wall, and you rub it with this very beautiful like a blanket, army blanket. So you're kind of literally giving it a static electricity charge, which holds it onto the wall, generated by this kind of British army. So yeah, there's kind of lots of layers in there, but also a very materially focused musing on these kind of layers of, yeah, let's say global neoliberal kind of pattern making. Here's another one, an overlay on a different pattern. You can see the pattern a little bit better in this one. And this is the kind of the scarf that I showed you that was from this British Army one. Oh, sorry, from this American Army one, on top of this kind of stars. So again, really interesting mix of relics there, of pattern making. And this is the final slide. I think I gave this to you in potential recommended readings, but what was really cool about this show is we got this really amazing New York Times article that spoke about the tech bro uniform meets Margaret Thatcher, disruption in shoes. And it was in the fashion section of the New York Times, and I talked about exactly these crossovers. So if you want like a snappy version of the kind of longer talk that I've just given, that kind of gives you a bit of an insight. But I also loved the way that the Times was able to kind of, I don't know, for me, like put these two things side by side, also visually. And it was a very visual piece. And I guess part of what I try and do with my work is to have a layer of discussion in the kind of wider media as well. And so I often court like major newspapers to kind of cover what I do. And I've only talked about a couple of projects, but there's often been a kind of layer of journalism lying on top of it, where I speak to people about the issues that I want to activate. So there's a material part of the project, but there's also this kind of discursive project that happens in the mainstream media. So that's a couple projects.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you a lot for this talk, and we hope we can continue this in the discussion afterwards. And we will send the invitation link to the Zoom conference under this video, and we will also put it on Instagram and Facebook. So that
when should we meet again for the Zoom conference?
Maybe in 10 minutes or 15.
15?
Yeah.
50 minutes,
Cool.
is that fine?
Sure. Yeah, what time will that be?
So let's say 2015, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, I will just send
Then-
an invitation link to you, and because we have a bunch of questions, but I think it makes sense to them to ask them
Great.
in the Zoom thing live. Okay, cool.
Very cool.
Okay.
See you later.
Thank you.
Cool,
See you
thanks so
in
much.
15.